Granny Weatherwax was gathering herbs. It's a British story. We call them herbs. When they came up the track, everyday herbs of sick room and kitchen are known as simples. Granny's herbs weren't simples. They were complicated, so they were nothing. And there was none of that airy-fairy business with a pretty basket and a pair of dainty snippers. Granny used a knife and a chair held in front of her, and a leather hat, gloves, and apron as secondary lines of defense. Even she didn't know where some of the herbs came from. Roots and seeds were traded all over the world and maybe further. Some had flowers that turned as you passed by. Some fired their thorns at passing birds, and several were staked, not so that they wouldn't fall over, but so they'd be there the next morning. Nanny Ogg, who never bothered to grow any herb you couldn't smoke or stuff a chicken with, heard her mother. "All right, you buggers." "Good evening, Miss Weatherwax," said Lettice Earwig loudly. Granny Weatherwax stiffened, and then lowered the chair very carefully and turned around. "It's Mistress," she said. "Whatever," said Lettice brightly. "I trust you're keeping well." Up until now," said Granny, and she nodded almost imperceptibly at the other three witches. There was a thrumming silence which appalled Nanny Ogg. They should have been invited in for a cup of something. That was how the ritual went. It was gross, bad manners to keep people standing around. Nearly, but not quite as bad as calling an elderly, unmarried witch Miss. "You come about the trials," said Granny. Lettice almost fainted. How did you—" "'Cause you look like a committee. It doesn't take much reasoning," said Granny, pulling off her gloves. "We didn't used to need a committee. The news just got around and we all turned up. Now suddenly there's folks arranging things." For a moment Granny looked as though she was fighting some serious internal battle, and then she added in throwaway tones, "Kettle's on. You better come in." Nanny relaxed. Maybe there were some customs even Granny Weatherwax wouldn't defy after all. Even if someone was your worst enemy, you invited them in and gave them tea and biscuits. In fact, the worser your enemy, the better the crockery you got out and the higher quality of biscuits. You might wish black hell on them later, but while they were under your roof, you'd feed 'em till they choked. Her dark little eyes noted that the kitchen table gleamed and was still damp from scrubbing. After cups had been poured and pleasantries exchanged, or at least offered by Lettice, and received in silence by Granny, the self-elected chairwoman wriggled in her seat and said, "There's a lot of interest in the trials this year, Mistress Weatherwax." "Good." "It does look as though witchcraft in the Ramtops is going through some sort of a renaissance, in fact." "A renaissance, eh? Well, there's a thing." "It's such a good route to empowerment for young women, don't you think?" said Lettice. Many people could say things in a cutting way, Nanny knew, but Granny Weatherwax could listen in a cutting way. She could make something stupid sound stupid just by hearing it. "That's a good hat you got there," said Granny. "Velvet, is it? Not local made, I expect." Lettice touched the brim and gave a little laugh. "Oh, it's from Bogey's in Ankh-Morpork," she said. "Oh, shop bought. Nanny Ogg glanced at the corner of the room where a battered wooden cone stood on a stand. Pinned to it were lengths of black calico and strips of willow wood, the foundations for Granny's spring hat. "Tailor-made," said Lettice. "And those hat pins you got," Granny went on, "all them crescent moons and cat shapes." "Oh, you got a brooch You got a brooch that's crescent shaped too, ain't that so, Esme?" said Nanny Ogg, deciding it was time for a warning shot. Granny occasionally had a lot to say about jewelry on witches when she was feeling in an acid mood. "Oh, well, this is true, Gaitha. I have a brooch what is shaped like a crescent. That's just the truth of the shape. It happens to be very practical shape for holding a cloak, a crescent. But I don't mean nothing by it. Anyway, you interrupted me just as I was about to remark to Mrs. Earwig how fetching her hatpins are. Very witchy." Nanny swiveled like a spectator in a tennis match, glanced at Lettice to see if this deadly bolt had gone home. But the woman was actually smiling. Some people just couldn't spot the obvious on the end of a 10-pound hammer. On the subject of witchcraft, said Lettice, with the born chairwoman's touch for an enforced segue, I thought I might raise with you the question of your participation in the trials. Yes. Do you, don't you think it's unfair to other people that you win every year? Granny Weatherwax looked down at the floor and then up at the ceiling. No, she said eventually. I'm better than them. You don't think it's a little dispiriting for the other contestants? Once again the floor-to-ceiling search. No, said Granny. But they start off knowing they're not going to win. So do I. Oh, no, you surely... I mean that I start off knowing they're not going to win, too, said Granny witheringly. And they ought to start off knowing I'm not going to win. No wonder they lose if they ain't getting their minds right. It does rather dash their enthusiasm. Granny looked genuinely puzzled. What's wrong with them striving to come in second? She said, and Lettice just plunged on. What we were hoping to persuade you to do, Esme, is accept an emeritus position. You would perhaps make a nice little speech of encouragement, present an award, and possibly be, one of the judges? There's got to be judges, said Granny. We never had judges. Everyone just used to know who'd won. Oh, that's true, said Nanny. She remembered the scenes at the end of one of the other two trials when Granny Weatherwax won, and everyone knew it. Oh, that's very true. But it would be a nice gesture, Lettice went on. And who decides there would be judges, said Granny. The committee, that is, a few of us got together only to steer things. Oh, I see, said Granny. Flags? Pardon? Are you going to have them little lines of flags and maybe someone selling apples on a stick? That kind of thing? Well, some bunting would certainly... All right. Don't forget the bonfire. So as long as it's nice and safe. Oh, right. Things should be nice and safe, said Granny. Miss Erig perceptibly sighed with relief. Well, that's sorted out nicely, she said. Is it? Said Granny. I thought we'd agreed that. Had we? Really? She picked up the poker from the hearth and prodded fiercely at the fire. I'll give matters my consideration. I wonder if I could be frank for a moment, Mistress Weatherwax, said Lettice, and the poker paused mid-prod. Yes. Times are changing, you know, and now I think I know why you feel it necessary to be so overbearing and unpleasant to everyone, but believe me when I tell you, as a friend, that you'd find it so much easier if you just, relaxed a little bit and tried being nicer, like our sister Gaitha here. And Nanny Ogg's smile had fossilized into a mask. Lettice did not seem to notice. You seem to have all the witches in awe of you for 50 miles around, she went on. Now, I dare say you have some valuable skills, but witchcraft isn't about being an old grump and frightening people anymore. I'm telling you this as a friend. Well, call whenever you're passing, said Granny. That was a signal. Nanny Ogg stood up hurriedly. I thought we could discuss, Lettice protested. Oh, I'll walk with you all down the main track, said Nanny, hauling the other witches out of their seats. Gaitha, said Granny sharply as the group reached the door. Yes, Esme. You'll come back here afterwards, I expect. Yes, Esme. Nanny ran to catch up with the trio on the path. Lettice had what Nanny thought of as a deliberate walk. It had been wrong to judge her by the floppy jowls and over-fussy hair and the silly way she waggled her hands as she talked. She was a witch, after all. Scratch any witch and, well, you'd be facing a witch you just scratched. She's not a nice person, Latrice trilled, but it was the trill of some large hunting bird. You're right there, said Nanny, but it's high time she was taken down a peg or two. Well, she bullies you most terribly, Mrs. Ogg, a married lady of your mature years, too. Just for a moment, Nanny's eyes narrowed. It's her way. Oh, no, that's Granny's voice. Oh, it's her way, said Nanny. It's a very petty and nasty way, mind you. Oh, yeah, said Nanny simply. Ways often are, but look, will you be bringing anything to the produce stall, Gaitha? Said Gammer Beavis quickly. A couple of bottles, I expect, said Nanny, deflating. "Oh, homemade wine," said Lettice. "How nice." Yeah, sort of like wine. Yeah, well, here's the path," said Nanny. I'll nip back and say good night." "It's belittling, you know, the way you run around after her," said Lettice. Yeah, well, you get used to people. Good night to you,"